Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Parliamentary and Scientific Committee discussion, our second already of 2021. So again, we have a busy year ahead of us. So that's one of the upsides of this current challenging time, is that we have been able to engage more people in our discussions, which is fantastic. Today we are looking at the issue of what does the UK-EU deal mean for science, and this has been a bit of a recurring theme for the PNSC. We've discussed this on a number of occasions from various different angles, and we're doing this this morning in conjunction with the Royal Society, and I'd like to place on record my gratitude to them for their support over the last few years, particularly when it came to creating a document, the science priorities for Brexit, which I think we did now probably 4 years ago, which I think was a very useful document and helped, certainly from what I have heard from parliamentary colleagues, helped the ministers at the time to see the importance and understand where the challenges were for science. So again, thank you for that. So this morning, I'm joined by 4 very distinguished speakers who I'm going to duly invite to speak for around 10 minutes in due course. We have Hobley. Rhea is Deputy Director, EU Exit Negotiations and Engagement at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I think Rhea is going to give us an overview. Then we have Sir Richard Catlow, who is the Foreign Secretary and Vice President of the Royal Society, and Richard will respond to the deal and provide a perspective on the direction of travel. Then we have Martin Smith, who is Policy and Advocacy Manager, UK and EU at the Wellcome Trust, and Martin will provide an assessment of where we are and highlighting specifics where we need to do a little bit more work. And then finally, we have Anne-May Jensen, who is Head of European Engagement, Universities UK. And Anne-May will focus on the issues that are particularly pertinent to universities. I'm sure we've got an exciting and informative discussion ahead of us, which I'm sure will also stimulate some questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please can I ask that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens rather than the chat. So someone will be monitoring the Q&A. Those questions will then be marshalled and I will call you and you will be unmuted and be able to ask your question. So as I say, if you could use the Q&A and not the chat, that would be very helpful. Right, I think without any further ado, we will continue, and I'm going to invite Rhea Hobley to talk to us 10 minutes, Rhea.
Excellent, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure being able to talk about Horizon Europe and what the association agreement means. And I'm just going to talk through it quite quickly at quite a high level, but I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have to ask me on this. So in terms of association, what we're talking about in relation to Horizon Europe and what the Trade Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, does for us is it allows us to be able to have equivalent terms for participation for UK and EU entities. It means that UK organisations can have continued access to collaborative R&I funding, infrastructure and markets via the Horizon programme. It allows UK organisations to lead and influence key collaborative projects, and UK experts can also then take part in evaluations as well. And it also means that the UK government can participate in programme committees and help define that strategic direction of the programme that we used to do in the past as well. And then overarching all of this, it helps to achieve the UK's ambitions of becoming a global science superpower. So what I wanted to do was just very briefly talk to you about the structure of the agreement, what's in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, then what's in the protocol, and then what it all means, and then tie that up with what happens next. So just looking at the structure of the agreement, overarching is that EU-UK agreement, which is the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or the TCA, as I'll be referring to it at the moment. And within that, it's made up of several parts. And part 5 is the one in relation to programmes that the UK has agreed to participate in. And it sets out the arrangements or the terms or the rules, if you want to call it that quite loosely, but it sets out that kind of structure of the UK's future participation in union programmes. It doesn't name the programmes, but think of it like an overarching umbrella which says that whichever programmes we choose to participate in the future, here are the rules that will be applicable across all of them. And then the terms of the UK's participation in those individual programmes are then included in a protocol to that agreement, and that's been published separately, as well as a joint declaration which has been published separately. And that Protocol 1 sets out the terms of participation in Horizon Europe and in other programmes as well. So just a little bit more detail on both the TCA and Protocol 1. So part 5 of the TCA, I talked about it having the overarching rules. That includes things such as the UK's financial contribution, the rules that set out fair treatment of UK participants. It sets out the appropriate governance arrangements, as well as sound financial management of programme funds as well. It's important to remember that the agreement is not time-bound, and it applies to any programmes beyond this current multi-annual financial framework, the MFF, which is the EU's spending pot for the next 7 years, starting from this year. And then separately, there's Protocol 1, which is a time-limited agreement. So it is only time-limited. It's attached to the 7 years I talked about for the MFF. It covers Horizon Europe, Euratom Research and Training, ITER and Copernicus, and these are name-checked within Protocol 1.
Have we lost?
It then specifies UK participation in all areas of Horizon Europe EIC. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it specifies the UK's participation as an associated country in all of the areas of Horizon Europe, except for the equity elements of the EIC fund, the European Innovation Council Fund. It sets out the terms and conditions of participation, and it confirms participation in the Joint Research Council, the Article 185s, 187s, Knowledge Information Communities, the EIT and ERAC as well. It also sets out the mechanics of the financial rebalancing mechanism. So the overarching rules of how the finances work are in part 5 of the TCA, but how it actually works is set out in Protocol 1, and it sets out the duration of participation as well. So in essence, what it means is that UK entities will be able to compete for funding on equivalent terms to those of member states. It's really important to remember that. So we shouldn't really feel a difference. And that means that the vast majority of UK applicants would have a very similar user experience as they had in previous framework programmes such as Horizon 2020. And it means that UK entities will also be able to participate in all areas of Horizon Europe programme. And I've talked about what that means as they are set out in Protocol 1. And the exception that I mentioned was the EIC fund equity elements. And that was simply because it's a very, very new fund and we haven't participated this in before. And we don't know actually what the benefits of this tiny element of Horizon Europe participation would be. And it's really important to remember that we can participate in the rest of Horizon Europe as well. Now, there might be some duly justified agreements, and this is how the Commission had phrased it. So this is quite normal because as with the previous framework programmes, the EU does reserve the right to limit the participation of associated countries in specific calls. And that can only happen if there are duly justified reasons, and we can ask the Commission to justify any exclusion of an associated countries from calls as well. And this particular element is not written into the TCA or the protocol, it's actually written into the Horizon Europe regulation itself. And if there is any exclusion, we would, as the UK, we would be communicated that in advance of any call opening, so we would be aware of that in advance. And then more broadly, on the governance side, as an associated country, the UK will play an active role in the ongoing governance and development of the Horizon programme. I talked about the UK representatives and experts taking part in the relevant programme committees and expert groups, and UK representatives, they will have speaking rights and access to information and documentation and so forth. As with other associate countries, the UK will not have voting rights at these committees, although my understanding is I'm not too sure how frequently voting happens in any case. More broadly, UK nationals will not be excluded from being experts or evaluators within the programme, which is really good news. So we are participating as fully as we had always done so, and we will participate as observers on the Board of Governors of the Joint Research Centre, and the UK will continue to remain part of the European Research Area Committee, or ERAC, which is what I mentioned before. And then just to finish off in terms of what happens next. So the EU has yet to ratify the two things, the TCA itself, so that still needs to be ratified on the EU side, as well as ratifying the Horizon Europe regulation itself. We think that's probably, on the Horizon Europe regulation, we think that's probably likely to happen either towards the end of this month or maybe the beginning of next. The UK has played a role in shaping the regulation whilst we were a member state. And so we're just waiting for the final things to happen on the EU side before the regulation itself gets passed. And then after that, the UK and the EU agree or adopt the protocols via a specialised committee. And this cannot happen until we've got a finalised regulation. So basically, there's just a couple more steps to take place. And once the specialised committee agrees the protocol, the UK is formally associated to the programme. And I mean, if there's one message that I could ask you all to take away, is to, I think, impress that message on our researchers, on our innovators, that we are ready to be a part of this, and for everybody who's interested to be part of the programme to start preparing for bids, and preparing for those early bids, I would add, simply because this is something that we had, if you read the draft protocol and then the joint declaration that's attached to it, the intention is there from both sides for the UK to participate in those early calls. And we had a DG senior official, Senior Razzo, last week also say that the UK would be part of the first calls. So we're really, really very much looking forward to doing that. And I would ask you to help spread the word to make sure that we are driving up those participation rates as well. And I just want to say thank you for doing that, and thank you, Stephen. I shall hand back to you, and I await eagerly for questions.
Brilliant, Ree. Thank you very much indeed. It sounds like we've done pretty well in negotiating our continued membership of Horizon Europe. If there was one thing, what have we missed out on through this? Is there one thing you would want to highlight?
I don't think we have missed out on anything. So we're very, very I think fortunate to be able to be part of this programme, and as I've said earlier, the aim was to ensure that our researchers, our innovators didn't feel any different, so there wasn't a cliff edge between what they'd experienced with Horizon 2020 and then Horizon Europe.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you again for your presentation. Right, we will now move on to our next speaker, which is Richard Catlow, and Sir Richard is Foreign Secretary and Vice President at the Royal Society. Sir Richard, 10 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this really fascinating webinar. And I think the first and really important point I want to make is that we really welcome this development. The opportunities for ongoing participation between the UK and the EU in the areas of research and innovation really are great. UK is going to make a very substantial financial commitment to become a central partner in European research and innovation, and it's a huge opportunity for our research community. So really want to emphasize that. We very much welcome this development. The Royal Society, UUK, the Russell Group have been pressing for this for the last 3 or 4 years, and it is very good to hear that the government has responded positively. In many ways, it's a new chapter in our relations with European scientists, but it continues many decades of collaboration under the EU science programs. These really have benefited UK science, and they've benefited European science in general. We allow the best scientists in Europe to work together on key problems. Now, it's important that the UK associates with Horizon Europe rapidly. And I'd like to pick up a point that Ree has made. There has been, for obvious reasons, a great deal of uncertainty in the scientific and innovation communities in the UK universities and elsewhere, and we really need to remove that uncertainty. I was talking to senior colleagues at my own university, University College London, last week, and they were telling me just this, that a lot of the community is very confused. So we need very, very clear messaging. We need clear communications and support for researchers and innovators who wish to engage with Horizon Europe programs. We need to rebuild some of the interactions and collaborations that have been somewhat damaged over the last few years. The next point I want to make is that, as I said, the association with the EU programs is fantastic. We really welcome them, but it's not sufficient to realise the UK's global ambitions as, to use the term that's being used increasingly, as a global science superpower. The programs are very, great programs. They're probably the most ambitious multilateral funding schemes in the world, and they have increasingly global participation. They complement, but they don't exclude other initiatives to build scientific collaborations across the globe through bilateral and multilateral relationships. UK can be an active participant in European science, as well as being ambitious in creating new deals, new relationships with leading and established scientific nations around the world, and as well as interacting with the developing world. We need to have a really comprehensive approach to research and innovation with the UK participation in international scientific collaboration. I think there's a real need for all funding agencies, UKRI, Royal Society, the major charities, really to think through their international programs. Now, another point I want to make concerns the costs of association. As we know, these are going to be substantial, and it's really important that they're covered by additional funding that's additional to that that's already been committed to building the UK's domestic and global strength in research and innovation. So the additionality of the funding is one of the very key points I want to make. Now, finally, we must ensure that the UK remains an attractive and welcoming destination for scientists at all stages in their career. We have been a magnet for talent in the UK, and we want to stay like that. And we need an immigration system that attracts the best international talent, and we need to ensure that our researchers can work with the best elsewhere. We need to expand the UK's cheaper and more flexible global talent visa system, which the Royal Society has played a role in advising on and in delivering and administering. we need to agree reciprocal arrangements on international mobility with other countries. We need to reduce the upfront costs of work and study visas in line with our international competitors. Again, another point I want to emphasize, these costs are very substantial and they can act as a deterrent. They're something like 6 times more expensive than the average across leading scientific nations. We need to use the newly created Office for Talent in Downing Street to make the UK an attractive destination for researchers and innovators. And we need to review the list of permitted activities that visiting scientists and academics can take on short-term trips without the need for a visa. We do want mobility. So just to sum up, it's fantastic that we're associating with Horizon Europe. We need to mobilize our community so that they apply for the great opportunities that Horizon Europe offers them. We need to look more broadly, though, at our international programs if we're going to achieve our aim of being a scientific superpower. And we need to allow the UK to continue to be a magnet for talent from all over the world. So thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for your excellent presentation. In terms of being that magnet for talent and looking at the direction of travel on our development of a new immigration system, are you encouraged by what you see? Do you think that the government, that Downing Street gets the issue? It's just a question now of putting in place the right measures, or is there still work to do?
I think, Stephen, I think they have got the message. And, you know, we welcome the recent developments. One, I think, very important message, though, is when we talk about attracting talent, we should consider the whole range. We're not just talking about, you know, Fields medalists and Nobel Prize winners. We need to attract talented PhD students, talented technicians, talented early career postdoctoral scientists. We need to bring in talent at all levels. So I'd like to emphasize that point to government, and I'd like to repeat the issue about costs. They are a real deterrent at present, but we're moving in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Sir Richard. Right, we will move on to our next speaker, which is Martin Smith, who, as I said, is Policy and Advocacy Manager at the Wellcome Trust. And I'm very pleased to say that I've worked with Martin before when he was associated with the Science and Technology Committee. And it was very sad when he left that committee, but I know that he's enjoying his new role at the Wellcome Trust. Martin, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. 10 minutes, please.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for that introduction, Stephen. So I'm Martin from the Wellcome Trust. I'm going to restrict my comments particularly to Horizon Europe. There are, of course, other elements of the deal that are relevant to the research sector more broadly, and others may pick up on those, or they'll come up in the Q&A. So looking specifically at Horizon Europe is what I'm going to do, but I'll start with just a little bit about what is Wellcome for those of you who aren't familiar. So Wellcome is a global charitable foundation. We're a £27 billion fund. We spend about £1 billion a year in support of our charitable mission, which is improving health. And we do that by funding research. I think we fund about 14,000 people globally and about 12,000 of them in the UK. And we're a global foundation, but our headquarters is in the UK. And actually about 75% of our spending is in the UK as well. So we really do care about the health of the UK research environment, because that's where a huge amount of our investment is. Wellcome is all about trying to tackle global health challenges, things like climate change, antimicrobial resistance, epidemic preparedness, which of course is very relevant these days. And global research relies on global collaboration. So we know that international collaboration makes science stronger. The UK is a very strong science nation, but the way you get the most out of that is through international collaboration. Horizon Europe is a very important part of this. Horizon Europe is the biggest game in town when it comes to international collaboration, €95 billion fund over the next 7 years. And actually, it's not as though it's just restricted to Europe and member states. We'll be joining as an associated country, and we expect others to join on a similar basis. And in fact, over 100 countries were represented in one way or another in Horizon 2020. So getting onto the deal itself and Horizon Europe. So I think the most important thing to start with is the overall picture, which is really, really positive. We need to start with tremendous thanks and congratulations to the negotiators in Bayes and elsewhere for what they've achieved with this. We've been calling for this along with lots of other organisations for several years. We've been working hard to try and secure this, and we've got essentially what we wanted. So this really is a fantastic outcome when we're looking at Horizon Europe. The other thing to emphasise is that there really isn't anything left to agree here. All of the hard work of negotiation has been done. And Ree rightly points out that technically we can't put our signature on the dotted line until the EU has ratified the instrument that establishes Horizon Europe. But that should happen reasonably swiftly, and then quickly after that we join up. Basically, there's nothing more to do. It's just the legal formalities to put in place. The other really positive thing is the level of access that has been secured, and there was a question that came up in the chat about what it includes. So it includes leading collaborations as well as joining them. It includes the ERC, it includes the Marie Curie actions as well. It's as full as it possibly can be. There's only those particular exceptions that Ree highlighted earlier on, which is the equity part of the European Innovation Council, and specific exclusions that may be for justified reasons, perhaps relating to security, where it's restricted specifically to member states. That hasn't happened before, so there's no particular precedent to point to there in terms of what to expect, but I would expect that we're talking about really quite small exceptions, really. So we've done what we were trying to do. This is fantastic news. Financial contribution, I'll just give the big picture here again. The point is that we managed to reach agreement on this. The issue was you're paying money into an uncertain process. You don't know how much the UK is going to win out of it. You don't know if that's going to be above what the UK pays in. You don't know if it's going to be substantially below. And we knew that this was going to be an issue. And so what the deal does is it sets some limits around that. So it says that if we're more successful by greater than 8% for each of 2 consecutive years, then the UK will need to pay some top up to account for that. In the opposite direction, if there's a shortfall in terms of what the UK wins out compared to what it pays in, and if that gets to 12%, then that triggers conversations about how to try and manage that issue. And if it gets to 16%, then the UK has the right to say, well, this is no longer looking as good a deal as it did previously. But I think the important point is there that we reached a stage where everyone was comfortable. And as Ree says, the opportunity now is there to go and win back that money, essentially, to work as hard as we can to get our participation as high as it can be and make the most of the tremendous opportunity that we've been given. Mobility, Richard touched on. There's some bits in the agreement that talk about a reciprocal commitment to making sure that the programme functions through people moving to take part in these collaborations. And on the UK side, that's essentially implemented by the Global Talent Visa that Sir Richard mentioned. And then it's for the EU to make sure that there's suitable provisions in place in the opposite direction. Influence was touched on briefly by Ree. So yes, it's true, we won't have voting rights as a country when it comes to the direction of the programme, but in every other sense, we will be in the room, our voice will be heard, our experts will be allowed to participate in that sense too. So I feel as though the UK has the influence that it can have even as an associated country. And as Ree says, voting very, very rarely comes up as an issue. So it's not something that we should worry about or feel as though we've enormously missed out on. And then finally, a potentially obscure bit of the deal, but I think it's Article 10 of the protocol, just clarifies that when it comes to rights of exploitation and IP, it's on the same basis as member states are. And that was a sort of a lingering fear from previous analysis of this, which wasn't quite clear whether or not it would be the same. And then my final slide is just picking up on some outstanding issues. So as Richard has pointed out, there is a tremendous need to communicate this opportunity that we have here now. I don't think it's uncertainty. There is nothing uncertain about the situation that we're in. We will be joining the programme as soon as that's legally possible on the basis that's been negotiated. And all that's needed now is to get that message out there. And that's, I think, a shared responsibility. It's both the community's responsibility to pick up the baton and run with it and make sure that we're communicating to our researchers as clearly as we can. It's also a responsibility on government to make sure that we've got all of the lines that we need, good quality FAQ, picking up on any of the issues that come up in today's discussion, just to provide that reassurance and give us all the information that we need to get it out there. And part of the reason why that's so important is that I think it's essential that we work hard to improve success rates. There was this lingering issue of, as I say, what happens if the UK gets out less than it's paying in? And the only way to correct that really is to go forth and collaborate and get your bids in and start winning back that money, really. So our success rate has diminished over the last few years as a result of Brexit uncertainty. It will take time to recover from that. We all have to be honest about that. But pushing as hard as we can in these early years to just completely neutralise that issue of value for money, I think, is extremely important. And then the final question, again, Richard picked up on this, but it's where exactly will the money come from? Now, surprising in some ways that this issue is still a little bit hazy despite the years of negotiations on this. But if you look at our participation in Horizon 2020, the way the UK paid for that was by being an EU member. So in principle, you could say, well, it's just a case then of transferring money that would have been spent if we'd continued being EU members to pay for this particular programme, which would otherwise have been a part of it. That's important because we are talking about a big chunk of money. We're talking of the order of a couple of £billion a year. And there's a couple of caveats on that. So it's important to remember that Horizon Europe is bigger than Horizon 2020 was. So in a way, we are asking for a little bit more money than just a simple transfer from what we would have used for EU membership. It's a bigger programme. But that 2 billion is a familiar figure in a sense, in that the domestic budget, the core research budget, has increased by a couple of billion or so in the last couple of years, which has been absolutely fantastic news. We've trumpeted that. We've been delighted to see that as progress towards spending 2.4% of GDP on research. If it happens that membership of Horizon Europe comes out of that increase, we will be right back to where we started a couple of years ago, and we won't have made any progress towards 2.4%, which will have undone a lot of the government's rhetoric in this area. So it is extremely important that money comes in to pay for this. Of course, we are in a difficult financial situation more broadly when we look at the economy, but I would hope that there's a sensible solution that the government can reach here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, and apologies for slides issues.
Thank you, Martin. Very interesting. I mean, it will be interesting to see whether or not that new money can come forward, because we would hate to undo all the good work that we've done to get to 2.4%. Just to go back to the point around communicating with the community, are there established lines of communication that allows you to get to perhaps some of those harder to reach areas? And is this now the time to try and, as a community, think about how it is you share the good news or bad news from time to time, to make sure that there is a process in place?
Good question. So I looked at the attendees for this call, and there's representatives of all kinds of organisations out there that are membership organisations. You will have your regular newsletters. Wellcome's sent out a briefing to the researchers that it funds in the last couple of weeks. We all have levers that we can pull. The extra dimension, though, is making sure that it's also communicated to our potential partners in Europe. And the government can help here, but very much the Science and Innovation Network needs to help with spreading that message that the uncertainty has been removed now by this deal. And so you can go back to collaborating exactly as you did when the UK was a member state.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, we will move on to our final speaker, which is Anne-May Jensen, who is Head of European Engagement, Universities UK International. Anne-May.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you to you and the committee and the Royal Society for the invitation to come and join you today at this event. Very much appreciated. I think as everyone, we're extremely relieved that at the end of last year, the future relationship agreement between the UK and the EU was reached. Though maybe not everything we may have wanted from a university perspective was achieved, I think a no-deal scenario would have been very damaging to our sector and our relationships across Europe. And I share all my previous speakers' feelings and sentiments around Association to Horizon Europe. That was an absolutely fantastic outcome. We are very grateful for that. But because my previous speakers already very eloquently talked about Horizon Europe, I will be talking about a couple of other things as part of the trade and cooperation agreement, but also some other consequences that are relevant for universities. So as I already hinted, as you can imagine, we were of course disappointed that the UK and the EU were not able to reach an agreement on Erasmus association. In the end, I think it came down to the financial contribution. I think it was always unlikely that the Commission would be open to discussing partial association to that programme. But to be honest, we had hoped that there was room for discussing the finances, which we were told was not. UKI has always made the value for money argument for association to Erasmus+, that if you add up the grants received and the economic benefits of Erasmus students spending their money and their time in the UK, then the UK would actually have an economic net benefit of associating to Erasmus+. However, if you just look at the grants received and the costs of association, then you have quite a large gap. UK contribution to the scheme would have been around 600 million euros a year, and we would have received around 250 to 300 million, which is a rough estimate. But a difference of 300 million a year is a quite a large gap, and given the current economic climate, for us it was unsurprising that this was not something that the UK government could commit to. I think it's important to highlight that any projects and mobilities funded through the previous Erasmus programme, which ended last year, are still protected by the withdrawal agreement, and nothing will change in terms of the UK's positional rights for the duration of those projects and mobilities, even if they run into 2021 and beyond. As for the next Erasmus Plus programme, though we won't associate, depending on the group that the Commission will assign the UK in the regulation, which hasn't happened yet, the UK will be a non-associated third country, and we will probably still be able to participate in some parts of the new programme, such as the Erasmus Mundus Joint Master Degree Consortia, and we can even lead those consortia. And we'll also have access to Jean Monnet calls and youth calls. Of course, this is quite limited compared to access to the entire programme, but it is good to know, I think, that some parts of the programme will still be open to us. One issue that we are particularly interested in, and which we hope there is still room for discussion in the new Erasmus Plus programme, is the UK's participation in the European Universities Initiative. We would like to retain access to those calls for both existing consortia that have UK universities as partners in them, as well as for future calls. And we feel, since the funding for those specific calls, even though they fall under Erasmus Plus, part of that funding will come from Horizon Europe. And naturally, because we are going to be part of Horizon Europe, we feel there is an avenue to explore there, and hopefully the Commission will be open to talking about UK participation as part of those calls. Then, of course, because we are no longer going to be part of Erasmus Plus, the government announced that they would implement a replacement mechanism, the Turing Scheme. We have worked very closely with the government in the last couple of years on what such a scheme could look like and what universities need. And we are still waiting for further details on the scale and scope of the new programme. But what we already do know is that it focuses on student mobility. So staff mobility will not be included. It will be global in nature, and the universities in all devolved nations will be eligible to apply. It will target students from a disadvantaged background, and it will provide organisational support for universities, which is much needed to run a scheme like that. It will not provide any funding to facilitate inbound student mobility, and the first year it will be managed by the British Council and Equalris. So linked to the Erasmus Plus and Turing Scheme are several immigration issues that need to be tackled, And we would like for the Home Office and the Department for Education to develop a dedicated immigration route that would cover educational exchanges, both work and study placements for up to a year. Because at the moment, students coming to the UK for a study placement of more than 6 months have to go through the student route, which is actually designed for full degree courses, not mobility periods. And because of that, it's quite an expensive route just for a period abroad. A student that would, for example, come to the UK for 9 months would have to pay in excess of £800 towards their visa and health charge in advance to do their period abroad in the UK. Also, students who want to come to the UK on work placements would have to go through the Tier 5 route, which also includes paying the health charge. So these are pretty admin heavy and expensive routes for short mobility periods. And we are asking government to put up a dedicated immigration route that would remedy these issues. But in the interim, we're asking government to make some accommodations for these students to allow their period abroad in the UK to be a little bit less expensive by lowering the fees. So moving on to a few other things that are relevant for higher education institutions that are covered in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. First being data protection. So we've got a sort of a bridge of 4 to 6 months in which data can flow as we're used to, and within those 4 to 6 months, hopefully the UK and EU would come to a data adequacy decision, which would then allow the data to continue to flow as we're used to. This is something that does really need to be sorted because our new nightmare scenarios that we have association to Horizon Europe, and then we don't have an adequacy decision, and then the researchers can't share their data. So that's something that still needs to be sorted. The other issue is the mutual recognition of professional qualifications between the EU and the UK. The MRPQ directive no longer applies to the UK, so that means that UK qualified professionals who wish to supply their services in EU countries should now seek recognition for their qualifications using the national rules in EU member states and the other way around. The TCA, however, does provide for a route for professional qualification recognitions in the future, whereby professional bodies in the UK and the EU could submit a joint recommendation for the recognition of a specific professional qualification to what they call the Partnership Council. And if the Partnership Council then approves that recommendation, this would result in a mutual recognition of that specific professional qualification between the UK and the entire union. So that's actually a quite a beneficial route, and we're hoping that the government will support professional bodies in doing that. Then the last one is services, because that has an impact on the transnational education delivery by UK partners in EU countries. And the agreement does provide for the provision of trade and services, and this could affect UK transnational education provision in EU countries depending on the form of TNE and the specific territory. Now, this is a very complicated area of the TCA, and I'm not going to go into that because I'm not the expert. I would have to refer you to our head of TNE. But in practice, it means that depending on the specific member state, conditions doesn't have to be, but could be imposed on either the legal form or the licensing, or impose things like nationality requirements for recruiting personnel, student numbers, and all these kind of barriers could be imposed on UK partners delivering TNE. That being said, it doesn't have to be the case, but they could. So just to summarize after all of this, what we think is needed going forward, and where we would also really appreciate support from government. One thing that everyone already said is making sure we get the participation in Horizon Europe up to the levels it was pre-referendum. So, you know, we as a sector body will be engaging very closely with the rest of the organizations on this call, but also government in trying to do that. I think part of that will need an active comms campaign to inform not just UK, but also European stakeholders of the implications of the deal. Sorry. We urgently need more information on the Turing Scheme. The timeline for this is getting extremely tight, and we know DfE is working very hard, but we really do need that information yesterday, basically. We need a multi-annual financial commitment for the Turing Scheme, as at the moment it's just a 1-year financial commitment, and of course we'd like that to be for several years. We'd also want there to be flexibility to adjust and improve the Turing Scheme after its first year to try and tweak the things that we think could be improved. And what is also necessary is to seek bilateral commitments from other governments to fund inbound mobility to offset the fact that the Turing Scheme does not fund inbound mobility. As I said, we also need a dedicated immigration route for educational exchanges that cover work and study placements. And at the last point, the transnational education bit, what we really need is a dedicated immigration source that details the implications for UK T&E provisions in each of the EU 27 countries. Thank you very much.
And May, thank you very much indeed. Excellent. Just on that issue of inbound mobility, what sort of figure would you associate with that? How much do you think we would need to find to be able to facilitate that?
So it would be great if that would still happen on the UK side, but I think that ship has sailed, to be honest. I don't think I don't have any reason to suspect that the UK government would fund inbound mobility. What they're trying to do is seek match funding from other governments who say, look, the UK is an incredibly important destination for our students. We're going to try and find a pot of money where our universities can dip into to send their students to the UK. To be honest, if I had to answer it, I don't think we ever did the calculations on how much you need to fund. I think it would be a lot because there are a lot more EU students coming to the UK than there are UK students going abroad. So in terms of financial sustainability, I understand that this decision was made, but we have to try and find other ways of now doing this.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Well, I think we've had 4 excellent presentations. We're now going to move to questions. And my first question is from Lord Rooker. Lord Rooker.
I didn't realise I could get to ask it verbally. Basically, given the parts of the deal where we're still, can I say, friendly, locked in to our partners in Europe, as in this particular SA Horizon, and because of the aspect of global Britain constantly trying to seek differences between the UK and the EU in the media, I mean, what's being done via I'll put it this way, the pro-Brexit press, to communicate the fact that we are still part and parcel of many of the schemes, which will have a cost, so we don't get our £10 billion back. Because I just don't think this can be left just to the scientific community. I think, as Sir Richard said earlier on, he talked to colleagues, and it was quite clear, the impression I got, was that a lot of work has to be done to reconnect people up again. And I think the climate of communication needs to change nationally. And I just don't see how it can be left just to the scientific community. So what's being done about that?
Thank you. Who would like to comment on Lord Rooker's? Martin.
Just briefly to agree that I think we do need to do more with getting the message out there in general, not just for the benefit of increasing our participation, but yes, that kind of tone that we're not withdrawing from Europe. We've left the EU, but not Europe, and we are part of these things. I think the nice thing is when the ink is dry on association, once the relevant instrument has been ratified, there will be a moment that we can make use of to say we're doing this and we're spending this amount of money to take part in this, and try and make as much capital out of that as possible, get as much coverage from it. And I think in a way try and counteract the bad news, for instance, relating to Erasmus. Bad news spreads much faster and much more easily than good news does, particularly in the context of Brexit. And so I feel as though everyone knows about what went on there, and not enough people know about what went on with Horizon Europe.
If I can just agree, I mean, I just agree entirely with Martin. We need to message as broadly as we can. And I agree with what you just said, Martin, that once the ink is dry, we should be making clear what a big advantage this is for the UK, how successful the UK has been in these programmes in the past, and our desire that it should continue to be so in the future. And just a final point, I think the messaging in Europe is very important. You made that point earlier, Martin, and a very effective way of doing that is via the Science and Innovation Network.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I agree with what you've just said there, Sir Richard. So there's something around the SIN network that we have our kind of contacts, and we will use them, are using them at the moment. But this is a whole sector effort. And you know, it's not just something that will come from the government. People on this call, you have your ears close to the ground, you know what really matters and the messaging that needs to be given out to people. And I would thoroughly recommend you going out and talking to your own researchers, your own innovators, to people who are part of your organisations, who you see on a daily basis compared to those from central government as well. We, for our part, will continue to talk to yourselves and to others as appropriate as well, but it really will take all of us to make sure that we can get those participation rates up, which is what we are aiming to do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, we'll now move on to Steve Hudson. Steve.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can indeed.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. One is really to do with budget and follows on really from what Martin, or rather, I think Martin's sort of covered it already. And then the second one is a detailed question, just to test how deep we are in the detail. The first one is how much of the advertised £350 million budget, EU budget saved every week, will now be invested in UK science? And I suppose, you know, will that budget be now funded from the 2.4% GDP figure that Martin mentioned, or will it be fresh new money from that saving? And the second question is a detailed one and is relevant to people who are actually taking up science and working on science with collaborators. How will the flow of scientific equipment across European borders be handled? Are we back to the inefficiencies of time-limited carnets? This is particularly difficult because a lot of scientific equipment is bespoke, and so it has no particular value you can look up in things. So it's actually really difficult to fill these things in. So those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone would like to comment on those points?
So I think maybe I can just quickly come in on the budget question, and that's almost like how long is a piece of string, I'm afraid, because it's such a broad question and probably an impossible thing to be able to respond to. But I mean, overall, the budget for Horizon Europe as a programme has been earmarked as around about 95 billion euros. And so it's worth just understanding, you know, that is the pot that we will have access to. And worth knowing that that's something that we should be able to use and we should use. And so, and why not? You know, we've managed to associate. So let's go forward and kind of take what's rightfully ours in that respect and get that research and get the international collaborations or the individual piece of research earmarked and start using that money. And then in terms of, I think, the flow of scientific equipment across EU borders, I completely understand your point on that. That is, I think, probably something that's covered in the wider TCA, which is not part of the association agreement and not part of the protocol that I've already talked about, but probably something that would be covered under the goods part. But I'm not a trade expert on that goods side, and maybe that's something that I can take away with me, unless someone else on the panel has an answer to that specific.
Martin?
Only that I've pondered that question as well, and I haven't found anything specific in the deal. But yes, probably best for Reid to get chapter and verse on that. And then yes, as you say, the big question of where the money comes from is important. In principle, this is money that would have been going to being paid for EU membership, and so hopefully we can use our fair share of that to fund our participation in Horizon Europe.
I think the funding issue is absolutely vital. It must be additional, or as you said earlier, Martin, we'll take a step backwards.
Yes, so I've shied away from using the word new because it's kind of money that was already being spent previously. So it's not new in that sense, but it is on top of hopefully the allocation, or a substantial in addition to the allocation previously.
Absolutely.
No, I get the point. I'm sure we have all heard loud and clear. Anyone else wanted to comment on Stephen's questions? No, in that case, we will move on to our next questioner, which is Peter Milford. Peter. Sorry, I should say Professor Peter.
Oh, that's quite all right. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Right, my original question was specifically related to how we would continue collaboration in research in food and agriculture across Europe. But I'm pleased to say that Ray Hobley's answer has input has given me most of the beneficial answers. The only thing I'm still not clear about is this will depend on the balance of what is in Horizon Europe. But yet I understand we don't have a vote in terms of the balance of the programs. How will we make our feelings known in terms of collaboration?
Thank you, Peter. Who would like to comment on that? Martin, please.
I will if no one else will. So yes, so as I say, I wouldn't worry too much about the voting right per se, because in practice we're still in the room when those conversations are happening. So the deal specifies that you still receive all of the same information, you still have the same speaking rights, you're still there. It's just on the incredibly rare occasions where there is a vote, then we UK representatives won't be voting. So I'm personally not too worried about that side of things in terms of influence.
Yeah, just really brief. Sorry, go on, Sir Richard.
No, I'm just going to say, reinforce what Martin said. These decisions are generally taken by consensus, and I've rarely seen this kind of committee go to a vote. So it is worth noting it, but I don't think it is a major concern.
Yeah, I was just going to come in and say that as well. I think it's so some of the things that I was saying earlier in terms of the governance side of things, we will be part of those programme committees where we will have speaking rights, and we will have our experts as part of the panels and so forth. So a lot of the influencing elements we will still be a part of, and the voting is less problematic. As we've heard earlier, there's simply less of that happening. I think there's also just to be aware, I think I'd mentioned earlier that we were involved in designing much of the Horizon Europe regulation because we were still a member state at that point. And a lot of it hasn't changed since then. And so a lot of it was designed on UK objectives and what worked for UK researchers and innovators as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. All right, we will move on to our next question, which is Doug Connolly. Doug, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? I'd like to thank the panel. It's been very informative. Just a quick question actually was answered. I think Martin answered it, which was around we can still be involved in ERC. There was some debate, and Marie Curie, and I believe you answered that anyway. The Marie Curie will be handled through the talents visa, which is wonderful. It's excellent news. I just noticed that we've had a brilliant last round in the ERC calls. One last question. I think this probably hasn't been decided yet. Do we have any idea on the overhead rates that are going to be used for the new program? Because 25% overhead rate is quite difficult, particularly when we're involving SMEs.
Excellent. Anyone feel able to address those points?
I was just going to say, I think this is a question for the Commission. Because they're the ones who are making these decisions rather than us making it on the UK side. We haven't heard anything from them yet.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question is from Robert Massey. Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, obviously, welcome the agreement like everybody else and the access to the various programs. I guess my overall point remains one I've made for a while, which is that if you Google work in the UK, you immediately come to a list of visas and barriers. Right? There's nothing actually actively encouraging talented people to relocate here beyond presumably the approaches they get from employers and so on to, to invite them to apply for things. So is there anything we can do, or perhaps, the MPs on the call or peers or those with influence of government can say, well, look, actually, yes, by all means, you've got to put people through this process, but at least encourage people to come here, say there are interesting opportunities in the UK, and these are the kind of things that you might speculatively look at rather than just waiting for, say, I don't know, a high prestige university to encourage you to come over.
Thank you. Richard.
Just
Sorry.
a quick comment. I agree, Robert, entirely. We need to make the system, we have been moving in the right direction with visa procedures, but we need to make the system welcoming. We need to make people feel that we want you here. A lot of this is a matter of the tone and the languages, but it is a really important point.
Yes, and I think, because you also addressed it to colleagues on the call, yes, we obviously need to continue to press government to make sure that we are attracting talent from across the world and across the spectrum of skills. As Sir Richard said earlier, it's not just about the medal winners, it's about all their supporting teams, technicians, etc. as well. So yes, it's a point very well made, and I'm sure colleagues on the call will have heard that. So on to our next question. Now, this is someone called Anonymous Attendee. If you could introduce yourself and put your question.
Yes, Stephen, we don't know who this is, so perhaps maybe better for you to ask it.
Oh, okay, fine. I'm looking in the chat. It's what is our position on call deadlines that will occur prior to ratification? So I suppose a technical issue. What happens between now and ratification? Ree.
So I mean, ideally, this doesn't happen, and with the way in which the regulations, so TCA is agreed, regulations are agreed, the protocol is agreed, they should all fall quite close in succession. So therefore, ideally, not having this happen. But I think it's worth remembering, I mentioned a senior figure from the Commission last week, Signor Razzo, who said that we would be part of those first calls. And it's something, I think, just to be aware of the joint declaration that accompanies the TCA and the protocol, part 5 of the TCA, sorry, and the protocol does say that the intention is there's every effort from both sides for us to be part of these very early calls.
Thank you. Hopefully that has answered that. So we'll now move on to Elizabeth Rollinson. Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I think you're still muted. That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good, good. So firstly, to thank the panel and also to say what a good job the negotiators have done. TCA regulation still needs to be ratified, and I wonder whether there is any opportunity for the EU to renege on any of the elements which have been negotiated.
Good question. Anyone? Ree.
It is a good question, and I'm sure lots of people are wondering this as well, but I think it's really important to remember that the European Commission, which had the mandate of all the member states behind it, agreed the TCA with the UK, and the ratification process is for the European Parliament only. So 2 of the institutions, that effectively means 2 of the EU institutions, have already agreed the TCA, and now it's going through the process for the final institution to agree it. And I would sincerely hope that there is, no going back on this, because we've worked quite hard to reach this point. And I think, in the spirit of cooperation, the European Parliament will also feel like that as well.
Excellent, thank you. Where are we? Who's next? Robert's gun. Robert.
Hello, I'm involved in the metrology programs, which is an Article 185, and we've heard suggestions that for the 185s, because they have a co-decision process, that there's additional legislation that has to go through after the Horizon Europe has been agreed and the protocol has been agreed, which because the budgets would need to be amended to allow the associates in, and that could cause a delay that will mean we miss first calls. Is that a true representation of where we are?
Who would like to yes, right.
So I was just going to say, so the large industrial partnerships that you're talking about are subject to their own sub-regulations, and you've quite rightly pointed out that they are also going through the EU legislative process as well. We do understand that their timelines are a little bit behind that of the main Horizon regulation, and we're monitoring them really closely. So, you know, our hope again is to be part of them and be involved from the very first calls as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Alex Connor. Alex? I can see you're unmuted. Do you want to put your question? Okay, we'll move on. Next is Atty. Atty, are you there?
Can you hear me now, Stephen?
Yes, I can. Brilliant.
Okay, Atty Emmett's working for Elsevier, but also visiting Prof at Surrey, and back in the 90s, responsible at the EPSRC for running the European element of of our program. So for specifically the ESRF and the ILL access. Just a couple of points there. In terms of the existing large facilities, I was just wondering whether the arrangements that we have agreed have changed any of the just the principles and the ways that we were accessing those facilities. And there were three probably big areas there. The just retour, which I think you've talked about in relation to money in the Horizon programs. That was always a big issue. Liability, and that's going to be a massive issue when you're talking about nuclear reactors, of course. So liability was also a major issue. So that's in relation to the existing facilities. And I just wondered whether there was any default thinking in relation to how we might engage with Europe upon potential new facilities. Now, I understand that those are so big that they will always be one-offs and there will be an element of bespoke about them. But I wonder whether there was any thinking that you could share in relation to how we might engage on those newer facilities going forward. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, well, thank you. My understanding is that the arrangements with the ILL and ESRF will continue as they have in the past. They're covered by separate agreements, so I don't think there is an issue there. And the UK also will continue to be a partner in the European Spallation Neutron Source, which is being developed at present. And I would think we would be able to negotiate participation in future large-scale scientific infrastructure.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment? No? Great, okay. Now, we originally scheduled this meeting to finish at 12:10. I don't know, are my panelists happy to take a couple more questions? Yep, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. In that case, we will move to Andrew Mackenzie. Andrew.
Hello, yes, Andrew Mackenzie from the Physiological Society. What would be a good outcome for UK participation in Horizon Europe? Are we looking for the UK to regain the ground that was lost since the Brexit referendum, so we play a leading role again in Horizon projects? Or would we accept, given now we're an associated country, that that's maybe less achievable than it would have been when we were a member state?
Ree.
I think I've just covered this broadly. I'm sure others will want to come in as well. So from our perspective, you know, we've lost a lot of participation rate due to the uncertainty that Brexit brought along with it. We want the UK success rates to recover as quickly as possible. And then coming back to what I said earlier before, that it's, you know, this is a whole sector task that we value the help of, you know, from everybody on the line, on the call, and just watching to achieve as well. And also, it's not just about a money in, money out program. We want to show that we can foster those networks and really value all the non-monetary aspects that research collaboration brings as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Martin.
Yeah, just to echo that final point there, is that it's not just about money in, money out. There's the intangible benefits being part of the programme. And so if we found that our contributions were still slightly in excess of the amount that we're winning in grants, that's not necessarily a bad outcome. But that bigger picture of, is there any reason why we shouldn't be aiming to get back to the kind of percentage success rates that we saw before the referendum? I don't see any reason, except that it will take time to get back there because of the lag of uncertainty. We've seen that from the Swiss example, from where they've been excluded from the programme and their success rate has been depressed for a few years. So it will take time, but if we work hard, I don't see why there's any reason we shouldn't get back to where we were before.
Just to say, I agree entirely. Our aim should be to get back to be the full and active participant that we were before the period of uncertainty started.
Thank you. Next question is from Ian Taylor. Ian? Okay, I'll move on to Barry Brooks then. Barry, hi.
Good afternoon, Stephen, and thank you for the speakers. The one point I wanted to raise was triggered by Anne May. First of all, great news about Horizon on the science and the academics field, but Anne May's point worried me in that talked about not yet resolving the professional qualifications that we've got in the UK and being accepted in the EU. I hadn't realised that, and I thought we, Engineering Council and the Science Council, had already established international accords of all sorts, and yet I think we're now up to individuals who want to go and work in a country to find out if they're acceptable. What has happened? Why wasn't this sorted at the same time as Horizon? Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Anne May.
Thanks. Yeah, so indeed, you are right. MRPQ directive was an EU directive, and therefore by leaving that no longer applies to the UK. The UK was more ambitious in terms of what it wanted for MRPQ out of the negotiations, whereas the EU was more of a, let's just, you know, each country arrange it for itself. So actually where they ended up is actually quite a nice compromise. Just to reassure you that those people who have already had their professional qualifications recognised both in the UK and the EU are fine. Nothing will change there. Also, those who've submitted their request to have their professional degrees recognised prior to the end of last year are fine as well. It's really about those students studying now and those people in the future getting their professional degrees recognised. So at the moment, indeed, it's something that would have to be done per country. If a student with a UK degree, a professional degree, let me say that it's not about academic degrees, a professional degree wants to offer their service in Germany, then they'd have to go through the professional body and the national authorities in Germany to get that recognised. What I am hoping, and maybe this is very optimistic, is that the professional bodies in the UK that might see, we've got quite a large share of our body going abroad to offer those services, would then reach out to EU located professional bodies and say, let's write up a joint recommendation to the Partnerships Council and then hopefully get several EU-wide, UK-wide professional qualifications recognised. That's my hope.
Sorry, could I just add clarification? When you refer to professional bodies, are you talking about the Engineering Council or the individual professional engineering institutions?
So yeah, the council, I would imagine, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll chase them up.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take two more questions and then we will draw things to a close. The first of which is from Stephen Ben. Stephen.
Well, first of all, I thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations, very, very helpful. I'd like to ask a question that goes slightly wider than the agreement. What effect do you think this agreement will have on other scientific cooperation within Europe and between countries? And I have, for example, in mind areas on space policy in the light of the fact that this Thursday in the House there'll be a debate on it.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment on cooperation outside of Horizon Europe? Sir Richard?
Well, I mean, just to make the very general point that Horizon Europe, it's great that we're participating, but it's not, we will need other international collaborations, including collaborations in the area of space research. So I just think we need to emphasize the point that, delighted as we are, the developments in Horizon Europe, there is need for much broader international collaboration.
Ray, sorry.
That's fine. So yeah, I mean, I completely agree on the need for collaborating. We're very keen to be able to do that with Europe and beyond, but just generally on science and research, and that includes space as well. I think it's really important to remember as part of the EU programs that we decided to participate in, Copernicus was also on that list as well. And so we will continue to be part of that going forwards.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right, just before I do call our final questioner, can I ask Mike Galsworthy, I think has a question. And then finally, we'll have Professor Richard Parker. So Mike.
Yep. Can you hear me?
No, we can't. We're just about. It's a very poor line.
Right, okay, it shouldn't be that poor. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay, great. So 3 quick things, very quick. One was about the European reference networks. I've not seen any mention of that, and there's been some confusion whether that is EU-based or not, as per articles in Lancet, Science, Business, etc. Second one is that with re-engagement with Europe, I think we probably need to go on the front foot and be more active than just continue with what we've got. So maybe that might even include new structures, bilaterals with Eastern Europe, things like that, that prove ourselves back in there. And I think probably we should have a nationwide consultation amongst our science community on what would be innovative and creative and get us back in there. And then I think thirdly, with regard to the issue of moving equipment across the border, there is also issues of moving materials, DNA, things that need sensitive transport, as well as long-term data holding as well, if adequacy agreements change. So some summary from bodies in the UK about how we handle all of that, now that those barriers have gone up, would be dead helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone want to comment on those points? Sir Richard?
Well, just a brief comment that I think Mike is right, that we do need to be very active in developing the collaborations after the uncertainty we've had. And certainly the Royal Society, we have a number of bilateral events we're planning to engage, including engagement with Eastern Europe. So I think it's an important point.
Any other comment? Ree and then Anne-May.
Thanks. I was just going to say, I mean, this is what we're starting to unpack, which is really, really helpful, is this kind of level of detail that sits under the Horizon association to Horizon. And so, you know, certainly for myself, I can take this question away and just start understanding, you know, where the links are to other policy officials who would probably be in a better position to be able to respond to this more directly. But it's really helpful to have those questions, I think, in the first instance. So please do send them on.
Thank you very much. Anne-May?
Yeah, thank you, and apologies for any background noises. My neighbours are remodelling. All of them seem to be remodelling nowadays. But just on the engagement side, we are talking to BAYS and other organisations like Royal Society and Wellcome Trust about what we can do together to really reach our European partners, because I think you're right on that. I think the key question is, how do you reach the researchers? Because if we all have our networks and we have our sister organisations across Europe, and I think it's one thing to get the policy messages out there, it's the other to really make the researchers across Europe understand that it is fine, you can work with us now, nothing's going to change, and really get that participation up. But we are already discussing quite in a wide sector group representation bodies that how we can do this. But if you've got any indeed lovely ideas and creative ideas on how to do that, very, very welcome. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And as promised, our final question will go to Professor Rick Parker. Rick.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Thanks for a wonderful conversation. So just to explain my credentials, I was chairman of the Clean Sky program in Europe for 7 years, the largest single research program in the Horizon 2020 scheme. In Horizon 2020 as a whole, we got 13.5% of the total funds to date, second only to Germany. And at the pro rata level we paid in as a member of the EU, that was a healthy profit. Now with a 2 billion contribution, we have to get that up to at least 15%. So back to Ray's earlier points, how do the panel intend to stimulate more engagement? And if I might just add, I was also chairman of the East Midlands RDA Innovation Committee, and the RDAs had a very good mechanism for getting SMEs to engage in the Horizon programs. And we seem to have lost that with the new organization, which is far more fractional and less regular. So we need to get SMEs to raise their hand and be willing to participate. Thank you.
Rick, thank you for that. Anyone want to comment? Ree.
I'll be brief. I can see Martin's about to come in as well. So I think certainly from a government perspective, as we've already mentioned, we're really keen to work with the sector to encourage UK entities to apply. We, of course, will be working with the Science Innovation Network as well. But about the messaging, you know, we would really hope that others on the line and other organisations will also go out and, you know, kind of push that messaging out there that the money is there. The association is practically there, and, you know, can we please encourage everybody to put those bids forward as well. I think the other thing to remember is that the EU side were also keen for us to be a part of this. So this kind of, you know, we've got our domestic facing work that we need to do on engagement, but there's a whole, you know, EU out there which we, in Europe, in fact, because there are other associated countries in waiting, if I can call them that, that would be keen to be able to collaborate with the UK. And so, you know, please, can we all work together and apply the messaging beyond the UK borders as well?
Thank you. Anyone else wanted to comment? Martin, thank you.
Yeah, just to pick up on some of those figures. So yes, if you look at the average across the whole of Horizon 2020, I'm sure you get 13-odd%. But it's kind of a game of two halves. If you look at the pre-referendum success rates, then you're up way above 15%. And then if you look at post-referendum success rates, particularly in the last year or so, it's very much below that. So I don't think it's impossible that we can get up to the 15% level to break even as you're suggesting. But actually that's kind of a narrow way of looking at the issue in general. It's not just about trying to break even. Even if we didn't, we accept that there is a cost that's worth paying to be part of Horizon Europe for the benefits being part of all of these networks. So I wouldn't put so much emphasis just on that bit, but there's no reason why we can't get back up to where we were before, which was higher than the average suggests.
Thank you. Unless anyone else wants to comment, I think we shall draw things to a close. I think, well, I certainly have enjoyed our discussions this morning. I think it's been very informative and in the main, very positive. I think there are still areas where more work needs to be done, particularly around that early stage students visiting the UK and UK students visiting other countries. I think that's something to work on through the Turing project. I've heard, or Turing Scheme, I've heard very clearly about how we need an immigration system that recognises the importance and fluidity of scientists in all their various guises being able to come to the UK and then leave again when appropriate. So, but in general, I think we're all very relieved, I certainly am, that our future inside Horizon Europe does seem to have been secured. And so for that, I'm sure we're all very, very grateful. I'd like to thank my panelists, Ree Hobley, Sir Richard Catlow, Martin Smith, and Anne-May Janssen. Also, can I thank Becky Purvis and all her colleagues at the Royal Society for helping put this together. So thank you to all of you for your contribution today. Thank you, of course, to the audience and the questioners for putting your very insightful questions to the panel, and of course to the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee team of Lee Jeffs, John Slater, Karen Smith, and Belle Allen, and of course to Charlotte Hall, who is listening in somewhere, who will be writing the report of today's meeting for our magazine Science in Parliament, which is published 3 or 4 times a year and now goes to all members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which I think is a very useful touchstone between politicians and the wider science community. So thank you for your contribution today, as I say, which will be written up, but also anyone who has contributed in the past. It makes it a very welcome and interesting publication. So thank you. Right. The only thing I have to say now is that our next meeting will be on the 15th of February at 5:30 p.m. Where the theme will be sector deals for SMEs. And I hope that some of you will be able to join us for that discussion. But until then, have a good day and thank you again for all your contributions. Bye-bye.